the tectonic plates within college football. Now notice, I did not say conference realignment because quite frankly, I'm not big on conference realignment. I think one, it's not about football, so I don't really enjoy talking about it quite as much because we're not really talking about what's going on the field. It's also pretty unreliable information that we're getting on conference realignment, not because people aren't doing a great job reporting on it. We got some of the best minds in the sport that are reporting on this at a media level. With that being said, those rooms, when you talk about realignment, are so small to where the information only gets out that those rooms want to get out. And sometimes that information is a bit of a smokescreen, or maybe they're using us as the college football public as a little bit of a chess piece. So for those reasons, I'm not a fan of talking about it. Also, it just messes with the tradition of the sport. And if you all have watched this show for any period of time, you know that we are very big on tradition when it comes to the college football landscape, and realignment tends to mess with that a little bit. But if you are a fan of Florida State, or you're a fan of Florida, or you're a fan of Iowa, this segment will apply to you, because what's happening right now in college football is not just the realignment tectonic plates are shifting, but I think the plates overall from a competitive landscape are shifting as well as to how your team could be impacted over the course of the next few years. And so what's happening, if you are just kind of parachuting into this whole thing, the Big 12 is looking for some extra cash. And God bless them. I mean, we're all looking for some extra cash. But the headline reads, the Big 12 is exploring private equity groups to create a few more greenbacks for themselves. But the major headline was the Big 12 is open to selling their naming rights. Now, this was great for social media because it allowed people like me to sort of think of ideas. Okay, what are you going to call the Big 12? Allstate was in the mix for the Big 12 naming rights, it sounded like. We'll see where that stands here as things progress. But people were saying, is it going to be the All-State 12, the All-State Conference? Could another company get in the mix? If we're sticking with the label of 12, I could see us doing like the Dunkin' Donuts 12, the Dunkin' Dozen. Like that would kind of fit like a glove if you're asking me, if we're married to keeping that 12 label on there. But what happened as a result of this on the social media side of things was interesting, because you saw the Big 12 trying to do some honest work and find a way to get some more money for their conference, and folks are dunking on them left and right, saying, poverty conference, that's so lame. They're failing to be as relevant as, the SEC or the Big Ten. But you know who wasn't making fun of the Big 12 in the midst of all of this talk around them finding extra money via naming rights or private equity? Was the Pac-12. Want to know why? Because the Pac-12 is not around to make fun of them anymore. Make fun of anybody for that matter. And God bless the Pac-12. I grew up in Pac-12 country. I grew up watching USC and Oregon, and I grew up going to the Coliseum. I grew up in that region of the country when I became conscious as a college football fan. I love the Pac-12. But the reality is that today in college football, when Texas and OU left for the SEC, and honestly, even before that, this has become a game of survival when it comes to conference realignment and how your conference exists in the new college football era. And so for the Big 12, thankfully for them, they have someone steering the ship in Brett Yormark, who doesn't have this administration background or this college athletics background. Brett Yormark comes from the entertainment business. Brett Yormark comes from the relevance business. And what relevance is today in modern college football is money. And so Brett Yormark is walking into this thing with a business mindset and is like, all right, I don't love that we're at this juncture where we have to find a way to make some more money and have to find a way to pursue relevance by nature of these different conferences starting to draw backwards and the Big Ten and SEC pulling away. But it is what it is. We got to find a way. It's like when you're on a life raft in the middle of the ocean because the ship is wrecked and there's a bunch of carnage all over the place. Like, you don't love it, but guess what you do? You find a way to adapt and to survive. Whether that's making your own fishing pole, whether that's making another raft with other pieces around, like you find a way, and that's what Brett Yormark is doing here. So as much as folks are dunking on the Big 12 for the naming rights thing and the private equity thing, and talk about, other jerseys now also having some signage on them, and that's potentially a talking point. Make all the fun you want, but just understand now that there is a very large variable of this that is all about survival. And the Big 12 and Brett Yormark are doing their best to adapt and to survive. So that's one piece of this. The other piece of this is you have the ACC that, to me, I mean, if you're asking me, I think the ACC is more so a matter of when, not if, they have some major changes over there. Could be tomorrow, could be at the end of the season, could be midseason. I don't know. Could be SEC Media Days. No idea. That feels like maybe a timeline I would watch, though, if we're using history as our teacher. Things tend to break right around this time to Media Days. But it is what it is. The ACC, it's been well publicized, has some major members that are unhappy. Florida State being one of them, Clemson being one of them. If you lose either one of those, I can't imagine they go out on their own. I think Miami would probably end up leaving the ACC if Clemson and or FSU left the ACC. And the reason for that being, for those of y'all, again, parachuting in on this whole discussion, Clemson and Florida State most specifically, has voiced their displeasure with the reality that, hey, listen, we bring home a fair piece of this pie, and we don't take home from a financial perspective nearly as much as we think we deserve to. And they're right. Like, Florida State is the massive brand. They're the massive draw when it comes to folks watching them on TV. And so they're saying, if we're making the pie, shouldn't we take home a larger piece instead of divvying it up evenly with NC State, Virginia Tech, Virginia, Duke, Wake Forest? Like, why are we making the same as them when we're the hot commodity here? And the ACC, I think, has their hands tied a little bit, because the way they could fix this situation would maybe make Florida State happy or Clemson happy, but it would likely make a school like a Wake Forest, a Virginia, and NC State unhappy, because to give someone a bigger piece of the pie, you have to go to somebody else's plate and take their piece of the pie and give it to Florida State. And for that to happen, one of those schools would probably have to sign off on that. So all that's to say, I don't think we're reaching a resolution here anytime soon. Again, I think it's a matter of when, not if. And so that leads us to the next part of this. Like, what happens then when Miami, Florida State, Clemson all look for other conferences? One, they probably would end up at, you would imagine, a Big Ten or SEC. Like, that to me on paper makes the most sense. But then what happens to the ACC? Does the ACC drift towards what the Pac-12 was? Can they adapt and find a way to be more relevant, like what the Big 12 is trying to do right now to stay afloat? Do we just jump into the superconference era where the SEC and the Big Ten take on the Big 12 and the ACC and whatever's left of the Pac-12? Like, there's this massive tidal wave. I was going to say ripple effect here. There's a massive tidal wave that is moving towards college football that is going to change everything as we know it. Now, will that happen gradually? Will it happen all at once? I don't know. But what I am saying is here, as the ACC changes, as the Big 12 struggles to find a way to adapt and survive, that's going to change the sport. That's going to change the format of the sport. Because if we go to a super conference era, if we do go to the SEC Big Ten, and I think that's probably where we're headed, well, then you have the regular season being impacted because you're not playing the conference schedules anymore. So if you're an Iowa fan, are you having a home game against Miami for a conference game? If you're a, fill in the blank here. If you're a Texas fan, are you playing Florida State for a conference game? And if you impact the regular season, we've seen this now, that's going to impact the playoff. You impact the playoff, that impacts, the calendar as a whole in college football. So a lot of things, I believe, are slowly but surely changing. And we'll look up here in 5 years, 10 years, and we'll see a college football that looks, in my opinion, a very, 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 very different version of what we've seen in the past. And it's one of those things where it's like, hey, I'm not a fan of it. I don't think a lot of y'all that watch this show are a fan of it, because what we grew up on is, in a lot of ways, evolving and changing. I don't think it's for the worse just yet. I think that would be a little bit too quick, too knee-jerky to say. But it's changing. And change isn't fun. Change is often met with resistance, and change is something that I'm not a huge fan of, to be honest. But I think that's where we are right now in college football. So I'm not selling you doom and gloom. I'm not telling you things are bad. I think college football is in a great place as long as you have the sickos that watch this sport and the folks that are 100% invested in this sport year-round are dialed in and showing up on Saturdays. But the fabric is slowly but surely changing, and I think, again, that's where we're headed. So the tectonic plates, slow, methodical, gradual, but at some point in time, we're going to look up and say, oh, whoa, this is way different than it was 10 years ago. Now, how different is way different remains to be seen. But that's kind of the state of the tectonic plates right now in the college football landscape. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.